The great hall held its breath as the Alpha King bypassed 100 perfumed noblewomen, his golden eyes locked on the darkest, dirtiest corner of the room. He didn't want silk or pedigree. He wanted the trembling scullery maid buried in soot, and that single choice ignited a war. The kingdom of Oakhaven had not seen a gathering in over a century. High in the jagged peaks of the northern territories, the ancestral castle of the Winterborn Pack was a fortress of black stone and iron, currently overflowing with the scent of anxiety, expensive jasmine oil, and unrestrained ambition. King Alaric, the undisputed alpha of the unified Western territories, had finally come of age to claim a queen. The decree had been sent across the frozen valleys and the dense emerald forests. Every unwed female of noble standing was to present herself at the midnight solstice. Deep within the bowels of the castle, far from the vaulted ceilings and the shimmering chandeliers of the great hall, a completely different reality unfolded. Down in the sweltering heat of the scullery, Maeve knelt on the damp cobblestones, scrubbing the grease from the massive iron roasting spits. Her hands were blistered, her nails chipped, and her face was heavily smeared with cold grey ash. The ash was not just a byproduct of her labor, it was a deliberate disguise. For 5 years, Maeve had masked her scent and her identity beneath layers of soot and dirt. She was a ghost in the castle, officially recorded by Mistress Helga, the head cook, as a mute orphan from the borderlands. In truth, she was the last surviving daughter of the House of Ainsley, a noble lineage that had been brutally eradicated by political rivals. Those rivals now walked the floors above her, wearing silks and jewels purchased with her family's stolen wealth. To survive, Maeve had suppressed her inner wolf so deeply that she barely felt the beast anymore, relying on the pungent smell of kitchen fires and lye soap to hide her true nature from the acute senses of the castle guards. Tonight, the kitchen was a chaotic frenzy. Mistress Helga barked orders, waving a wooden spoon like a broadsword. Dozens of servants rushed back and forth, carrying silver platters of roasted venison, spiced pheasants, and towering spun sugar confections to feed the hundreds of visiting dignitaries. "Keep your heads down and your feet moving," Mistress Helga shouted, her face flushed red from the heat of the hearth. "If Lord Cedric catches any of you dawdling in the corridors, you'll be thrown in the dungeons before the king even takes his first sip of wine. Maeve, bring the next load of firewood." Maeve nodded silently, hoisting a massive bundle of rough-hewn oak logs onto her slender shoulders. As she moved through the smoky kitchen, she caught a glimpse of the upper corridors through the servants' archway. The noble ladies were lined up, waiting to make their grand entrances. Among them stood Lady Genevieve of the House of Morcant. Genevieve was the epitome of werewolf aristocracy. Her hair was spun gold, cascading down a gown of midnight blue velvet that clung to her curves perfectly. Her neck was adorned with diamonds that caught the torchlight, but it was her scent that commanded attention. A potent, intoxicating blend of crushed orchids and predatory confidence. Genevieve was the favorite. Her family was the wealthiest in the Western territories, and her father had been subtly maneuvering this match for years. She stood with her chin raised, looking at the other women with thinly veiled contempt, wholly unaware of the filthy servant girl watching her from the shadows. Maeve felt a brief, sharp pang of sorrow, not of jealousy, but of memory. The diamonds around Genevieve's neck had once belonged to Maeve's mother. A sudden, deafening blast of the castle horns shattered the ambient noise. The king had entered the great hall. Even down in the scullery, the shift in the atmosphere was instantaneous. The sheer, oppressive weight of the Alpha King's aura pressed down through the stone floors, making the weaker servants physically stagger. Maeve's breath hitched. For the first time in 5 years, the dormant wolf inside her soul stirred, scratching frantically at the walls of the mental cage she had built for it. Her heart hammered against her ribs as an overwhelming, primal instinct threatened to break her composure. She dropped the firewood with a heavy clatter, immediately dropping to her hands and knees to gather the logs, desperately trying to ground herself in the physical pain of the splinters piercing her skin. Upstairs, the heavy oak doors of the great hall swung open. King Alaric stepped into the light. He was a terrifying vision of martial power and wild beauty. Broad-shouldered and towering over his commanders, he wore a simple tunic of black leather and a heavy fur mantle, refusing the opulent silks the nobles favored. His face was a landscape of sharp, aristocratic angles, marred only by a thin, faded scar crossing his jaw, a testament to the battles he had fought to unify the Pax. His eyes, a piercing, luminescent amber, swept over the assembly. The silence in the hall was absolute. Every noble, every lord, and every Luna bowed their heads, exposing their necks in a display of total submission. Genevieve sank into a flawless curtsy, making sure her perfume wafted precisely in the king's direction. She was ready to be crowned. She was ready to rule. But as King Alaric descended the stone steps into the crowd, his amber eyes narrowed. He did not look at the bowing nobles. He did not look at the gold or the velvet. He stopped at the edge of the dais, his nostrils flaring slightly as he took a deep, slow breath, filtering through the overwhelming stench of political desperation and heavy perfumes. He was searching for something, though he did not yet know what it was. The king's prolonged silence stretched the tension in the great hall to a breaking point. Commander Cedric, the Alpha's most trusted enforcer, shifted uneasily at the base of the throne. It was customary for the king to immediately begin walking the line of prospective mates, allowing his wolf to gauge the strength and compatibility of the noble females. But Alaric stood frozen, his head tilted slightly, like a predator tracking a scent on a distant wind. "My king," Cedric murmured, his voice barely carrying over the crackle of the massive hearth fires. Alaric raised a single, gloved hand, silencing his commander. His golden eyes began to track across the room, bypassing the front rows entirely. The scent he had caught was impossibly faint, buried beneath layers of cooked meat, burning wood, and stale sweat. It was not the sweet, cloying aroma of the noble women. It was something raw, wild, and utterly intoxicating. The scent of pine needles after a lightning strike, mixed with a deep, bitter ash. It was the scent of a true equal. It was the scent of his destined mate. Slowly, deliberately, Alaric began to walk. The crowd parted like the Red Sea before him. Genevieve, positioned in the most prominent spot near the center aisle, felt a thrill of triumph as the king approached. She adjusted her posture, offering him a radiant, practiced smile, her eyes glittering with ambition. She held her breath as his massive frame shadowed her. He didn't even look down. Alaric stalked right past Genevieve, his heavy boots echoing off the stone. The smile on Genevieve's face shattered, replaced by a pale mask of shock and instant humiliation. Whispers erupted through the ranks of the nobility like a sudden plague. The king was walking away from the high-born lineages and heading toward the dark, arched corridors at the back of the hall, the servant entrances. Down in the shadows, Maeve had just managed to stack the last of the firewood. She wiped her soot-stained brow, her chest heaving as she fought the agonizing pull of the mate bond that was suddenly tearing through her blood. She didn't understand what was happening to her. Her wolf was howling in the back of her mind, demanding she run, demanding she submit, demanding she reveal herself. "Boy!" A harsh whisper hissed from the doorway. It was Mistress Helga, gesturing frantically from the shadows. "Get out of the main corridor! The king is approaching the arches!" Maeve scrambled backward, pressing her slender frame against the cold stone wall, trying to meld into the darkness. She pulled the hood of her burlap tunic over her head, letting the ash on her face blend with the shadows. But it was too late. The heavy velvet curtains, separating the kitchen corridor from the great hall, were violently ripped aside. King Alaric stepped into the dim, greasy light of the servants' passage. The imposing Alpha filled the entire archway, his chest heaving, his amber eyes glowing with an unnerving, predatory intensity in the dark. For a fraction of a second, time stopped. Maeve looked up, and her gaze locked with the king's. The impact of the mate bond slammed into them both with the force of a physical blow. Alaric let out a low, rumbling growl that vibrated the very stones of the castle. He didn't see the dirt. He didn't see the oversized, ragged clothes or the thick layer of grey soot masking her features. He only saw the soul of the woman his wolf demanded. Before Maeve could even take a breath to scream, Alaric crossed the distance between them in a blur of motion. His massive hands clamped onto her shoulders, and with a single, effortless pull, he dragged her out of the shadows and straight into the blazing light of the great hall. A collective, horrified gasp echoed through the cavernous room. Hundreds of nobles stared in sheer disbelief as their Alpha King, the most powerful werewolf in a generation, hauled a filthy, ash-covered servant into the center of the royal court. Maeve stumbled, her bare, blackened feet sliding on the polished marble. She instinctively tried to pull away, terrified of the exposure. But Alaric's grip was absolute. He pulled her flush against his chest, wrapping one arm possessively around her waist, tucking her against his side for the entire court to see. "What is the meaning of this?" Lord Morcant, Genevieve's father, broke the silence, his voice trembling with a dangerous mix of outrage and fear. "Your Majesty, this creature is a scullery maid. She is covered in filth." Genevieve stepped forward, her face flushed dark crimson with fury. "Alaric, this must be some sort of jest. You humiliate our houses for a peasant who smells of grease and dog." Alaric's lips curled over his teeth, a lethal snarl rumbling in his chest that forced Lord Morcant to instinctively take a step back. "Watch your tongue, Morcant," the king warned, his voice a dark, echoing baritone that promised violence. "You speak of your future queen." The great hall erupted into sheer chaos. Noblemen shouted in protest, women fanned themselves as if they might faint, and the royal guards immediately dropped their hands to the hilts of their swords, anticipating a riot. Maeve was shaking violently against Alaric's side. The scent of the Morcant family, the people who had murdered her father, was suffocating her. The panic, the adrenaline, and the overwhelming power of the Alpha's touch finally shattered the mental cage she had maintained for years. Her suppressed wolf tore free. Suddenly, the overpowering scent of the Ainsley bloodline, a pure, ancient, and royal lineage thought to be completely extinct, flooded the great hall, washing away the smell of ash and soot. The distinct, commanding aura of an alpha female hit the crowd, silencing the shouting nobles instantly. Genevieve staggered backward as if she had been slapped, her eyes wide with terror as she recognized the scent of the family her father had supposedly wiped out. King Alaric looked down at the trembling, ash-stained girl in his arms, feeling the immense power radiating from her fragile frame. A slow, terrifying smile spread across his face as he realized exactly who he had just claimed. The heavy oak doors of the royal quarters slammed shut, cutting off the deafening roar of the scandalized Great Hall. King Alaric did not set Maeve down immediately. He carried her down the winding, torch-lit corridor of the private wing, his grip possessive and unyielding. Behind them, Commander Cedric walked with a hand pressed firmly against the hilt of his sword, his eyes darting to every dark alcove. The air in the private corridor was thick with the scent of ozone and ancient power, a direct result of Maeve's sudden wolf awakening. Alaric kicked open the doors to his private chambers, a sprawling sanctuary of dark mahogany. Heavy tapestries depicting ancient wolf victories, and a massive hearth that crackled with welcoming warmth. He gently placed Maeve on her feet near the fire. The contrast was stark. Her ragged, ash-coated form stood upon an exquisite hand-woven crimson rug imported from the Eastern Empires. "Bring the head healer, Edith Bramble, immediately," Alaric ordered Cedric without turning around. "And ensure Robert Clifton doubles the perimeter guards. No one enters this wing. Not Morcant. Not his daughter, not even the High Council lords." "At once, my king," Cedric replied, bowing deeply before slipping out and securing the heavy doors behind him. Maeve stood frozen by the hearth, her body trembling so violently that the ashes on her tunic fell in small grey flakes onto the floor. The suppression of her wolf for 5 long years had taken a massive toll on her body. Now that the spirit was free, her senses were painfully sharp. She could hear the distinct heartbeat of the guard outside, the crackle of the wood sap exploding in the fire, and most overwhelming of all, the deep, steady breathing of the Alpha King, standing just inches away from her. Alaric stepped closer, his imposing frame casting a long shadow over her. His amber eyes had not lost their luminescent glow. Slowly, with a gentleness that contradicted his brutal reputation, he reached out and captured her chin with his leather-gloved fingers. He tilted her face upward, forcing her to look into his eyes. "The House of Ainsley was slaughtered 5 years ago," Alaric murmured, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that sent a strange warmth rushing through her veins. "I was told there were no survivors. I was told the line of the Silver Wolf had ended." "Who are you?" Maeve swallowed hard, her throat dry from the kitchen smoke and the sheer terror of her exposure. For years, she had pretended to be mute to avoid betraying her noble accent. When she finally spoke, her voice was raspy, yet it carried an undeniable melodic authority. "I am Maeve Ainsley, daughter of Lord Alastair and Lady Catherine. I survived the fire by crawling through the servant stone flues. The ash that hides me from my enemies became my, armor." Alaric's jaw tightened, the scar on his cheek twitching with suppressed rage. "Lord Morcant claimed your lands under the pretense that bandits had wiped out your family. He presented your mother's diamond necklace to the council as a relic salvaged from the wreckage." "He lies," Maeve whispered, a sudden spark of ancient alpha anger flaring in her violet eyes. "It was no bandit raid. I saw the Morcant crest on the armor of the men who put the torches to our nursery. I saw Lord Morcant himself strike down my father while he fought to defend our gate." Before Alaric could answer, a soft knock echoed through the door. Edith Bramble, an elderly wolf with wise, weathered features and a calming lavender scent, entered carrying a basin of warm water, oils, and fresh linen. She took one look at Maeve, froze in realization as she caught the unmistakable scent of the Ainsley line, and immediately dropped to her knees. "Rise, Edith," Alaric commanded softly. "Help her clean the soot away. Let the world see exactly who the moon goddess has delivered to me." For the next hour, Maeve endured the gentle scrubbing of the old healer, as the layers of grey ash and kitchen grease were washed away by the warm water. Her true appearance emerged, leaving even the stoic king breathless. Her skin was a flawless porcelain white, contrasting beautifully with her raven-black hair that cascaded past her shoulders in rich waves. On her right collarbone, a distinct silver birthmark shaped like a crescent moon glowed faintly, the undeniable seal of the true Alpha lineage. Once Maeve was dressed in a simple, flowing emerald gown provided by Edith, the healer bowed and departed, leaving the fated mates alone once more. Alaric walked over to a velvet-lined case on his desk, pulling out a heavy iron key. He opened a hidden wall compartment and withdrew a sealed parchment document, the old territorial treaty, signed by Maeve's father. "Tomorrow, the High Council will meet to demand I rescind my choice," Alaric said, looking at her with an intensity that made her heart race. "Morcant has spent years buying the loyalty of lords like Raymond Brooks and Donald Harrington. They will claim you are a fraud, a kitchen girl using witchcraft." "Let them try," Maeve said, her voice growing stronger as she stepped closer to him. "My blood speaks for itself. The wolf inside me remembers the face of every man who took my family away." Suddenly, the heavy glass of the chamber window shattered into 1,000 pieces. Alaric reacted instantly, throwing his body over Maeve and slamming her down to the floor as a black feathered crossbow bolt embedded itself deeply into the mahogany headboard of his bed. A dark figure, clad in black leather, vaulted through the broken window, a silver dagger gleaming in the firelight. Alaric roared, his transformation partially taking over as his claws extended. He lunged at the assassin, catching the man by the throat before the blade could descend. The assassin writhed in the king's iron grip, but before Alaric could interrogate him, the intruder bit down on a poison capsule hidden in his teeth. Black blood spilled from his lips, and his body went completely limp. Alaric ripped the black mask off the dead man's face. Maeve gasped, crawling forward to look. "I know him," Maeve whispered, her eyes wide with horror. "That is Walter Higgins. He is Lord Morcant's personal shadow guard. Morcant knows I am alive, and he will stop at nothing to silence me before dawn." The dawn broke over the castle of Oakhaven, not with a gentle light, but with a cold, oppressive grey fog that rolled off the northern peaks. Inside the great council chamber, the atmosphere was a powder keg, waiting for a single spark. The long, circular stone table was packed with the most powerful alphas and lunas of the Western Territories. At the center stood Lord Morcant, his chest puffed out, flanked by a weeping Lady Genevieve and their most powerful political ally, Lord Donald Harrington. "This is an insult to the sacred traditions of our ancestors," Lord Morcant bellowed, slamming his fist onto the stone table. "The Alpha King expects us to bow to a common kitchen servant, a girl who has spent half a decade scrubbing our grease and breathing our smoke. It is an enchantment, a dark spell cast by a peasant to usurp the throne." Lord Donald Harrington nodded in agreement, his gruff voice echoing through the chamber. "The treaty clearly states the king must choose a mate of noble blood to ensure the strength of the unified Pax. We cannot allow the royal bloodline to be corrupted by a nameless scullery maid." The massive double doors of the council chamber swung open with a thunderous crash, cutting off Harrington's words. King Alaric walked into the room, wearing his full battle armor of dark iron and silver wolf fur. Beside him walked Maeve. She no longer wore the burlap tunic or the protective mask of ash. She walked with her chin held high, her emerald gown sweeping across the stone floor, her violet eyes scanning the room with a freezing intensity that caused several older lords to gasp in recognition. "Silence," Alaric commanded, his voice a devastating wave of alpha power that forced every lord in the room to instantly drop into a partial bow, their instincts overriding their political ambitions. Alaric took his place at the head of the table, but he did not sit. He remained standing, keeping his hand firmly resting on the small of Maeve's back. "You speak of noble blood, Lord Harrington," Maeve said, her voice clear and resonant, filling every corner of the vast chamber. "You speak of names and lineages. Look closely at my face. Look at the crescent mark upon my shoulder. I am no nameless servant. I am Maeve Ainsley, the rightful heir to the northern valleys and the true daughter of the house you thought you destroyed." A murmur of absolute shock rippled through the council. Lord Morcant's face turned completely white, though he quickly forced a mocking laugh. "A convenient fairy tale. The Ainsleys died in a fire 5 years ago. You are nothing but a deceptive thief who stole their secrets while working in the kitchens. Am I?" Maeve stepped forward, completely stepping out from Alaric's shadow. She closed her eyes for a brief second, breathing in the scent of the room. When she opened them, they glowed with a pure, brilliant silver light, the mark of a royal alpha female, a trait that could never be faked or stolen by a commoner. The sheer pressure of her aura filled the room, forcing Lady Genevieve to drop to her knees, weeping from the sheer dominance of the scent. "5 years ago, Lord Morcant," Maeve continued, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, "you contracted a group of rogue mercenaries, led by a man named Walter Higgins. You paid them 40 pieces of gold to burn my ancestral home. You believed you killed everyone. But Walter Higgins died in the king's private chambers last night, wearing your house crest beneath his armor, after attempting to assassinate me." Commander Cedric stepped forward, throwing a heavy leather pouch onto the center of the stone table. It burst open, spilling dozens of gold coins, stamped with Lord Morcant's private family seal, along with the black mask worn by the assassin. "This is treason," Lord Donald Harrington muttered, quickly taking a step away from Morcant, realizing the wind had completely shifted. "To attempt the life of a fated mate within the king's own chambers is punishable by death." "It is a frame job!" Morcant shrieked, his eyes wild as he realized he was trapped. He drew a hidden silver dagger from his sleeve and lunged across the table, not at the king, but directly at Maeve, desperate to destroy the evidence of his sins. But Maeve was no longer the helpless child from the burning castle. With a fierce animalistic snarl, her inner wolf tore completely to the surface. She didn't wait for Alaric to protect her. In a blur of silver light and white fur, she shifted into a massive, elegant silver wolf. She leapt over the stone table, her jaws snapping shut around Morcant's wrist, shattering the bone instantly and sending the silver dagger clattering across the floor. Morcant screamed in agony as the silver wolf pinned him to the ground, her massive paws crushing his chest, her fangs hovering mere inches from his throat. The entire council stood frozen in absolute awe and terror. The scullery maid covered in ashes was gone. In her place stood a terrifyingly beautiful, lethal queen. King Alaric walked slowly to the edge of the table, looking down at the defeated lord. He placed a hand on the silver wolf's head, and Maeve slowly stepped back, allowing the king to deliver the final judgment. "For the crime of treason, high murder of a noble house, and attempting the life of the future Queen of Oakhaven," Alaric announced, his voice echoing with the finality of a death knell. "The House of Morcant is stripped of all titles, lands, and wealth. Lord Morcant will face execution at dawn, and his daughter Genevieve is hereby exiled to the frozen wasteland borders." Maeve shifted back into her human form, her emerald dress magically pristine as the royal wolf magic settled within her blood. She stood tall beside Alaric, looking down at the speechless, trembling nobles who had spent the previous evening mocking her existence. Alaric reached out, taking her hand and lifting it high for the entire council to see. "Behold your Luna," the king proclaimed. Every single lord, alpha, and remaining noble in the chamber dropped to their knees, bowing their heads in complete, absolute submission to the girl who had risen from the ashes to claim the throne. The ashes of the past had finally cleared, revealing a radiant, unstoppable queen who had turned the entire medieval werewolf hierarchy upside down. Maeve and Alaric's historic union sealed the fate of Oakhaven forever, proving that true destiny can never be buried by greed or fire. If you were thrilled by this epic journey of dark romance, fierce betrayal, and royal vengeance, please hit that like button right now. Share this video with your pack and subscribe for more unforgettable stories.